Welcome back to class, everyone. Let's jump right into today's explainer because we have a lot of ground to cover. We're taking a deep dive into an era where faith and empire collided in absolutely spectacular fashion. Specifically, we're looking at the profound entanglement of Roman imperial politics and early Christian theology. This is really the story of how the beliefs of a previously persecuted minority completely flipped to become the geopolitical glue of the greatest empire on Earth. So let's get into it. Here's our syllabus for the lecture today. We're going to start with Constantine and the First Council, move on to how the Creed functioned as political unity, and then compare the first three councils. After that, we'll hit Chalcedon and the Great Schism, explore shifting power and icon debates, and finally wrap up with the enduring imperial legacy. All right, starting right off with Section 1, Constantine and the First Council. This is the exact moment that state involvement in religious affairs became the new normal. Now I want you all to really put yourselves in this historical context. Imagine your Emperor Constantine. It's the early 4th century, you've just legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, and you're banking on this growing faith to be the ultimate unifying force for the Roman Empire. But instead, what happens? You find the church completely tearing itself apart over the so-called Arian controversy. Arius, who's a presbyter from Alexandria, is out there arguing that the Son of God was a created being. His famous slogan was, "There was a time when the Son was not." Naturally, his opponent, Bishop Alexander, pushes back hard, insisting the Son is co-eternal with the Father. Now, to the Roman state, you have to understand, this wasn't just some academic religious spat. No, this was a massive crisis of state stability. So the big question is, how on earth do you fix it? Well, you fix it by taking absolute charge. Take a look at the man depicted in this magnificent mosaic, Emperor Constantine I. When local attempts to solve this Arian dispute totally failed, Constantine stepped in and invoked a very traditional authority held by Roman emperors, the role of Pontifex Maximus, basically the chief priest responsible for keeping religious peace. So, he convenes the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and he acts as the ultimate political patron. I mean, he's literally using imperial public funds to pay for the travel and lodging of over 300 bishops. He gives them a grand hall right in his own palace. He doesn't vote himself, but he's sitting right there, ensuring they reach a consensus. Just like that, the persecuted church became the imperial church. Moving on to Section 2, the Creed as political unity. Let's look at the specific nuts and bolts tools the Roman state used to lock in this fragile new unity. This right here is the ultimate Socratic question for late antiquity. The bishops at Nicaea were facing a monumental challenge. How do you reconcile Christian monotheism with the deity of Christ, but do it in a way that is legally binding and totally unambiguous? The everyday, simple language of the early church wasn't going to cut it anymore. They needed the language of precise philosophical speculation. Basically, they needed a watertight definition that would legally exclude Arius. And this was their silver bullet, homoousios. It's a Greek term meaning of the same essence or substance. Now, here's the fascinating part. This word was incredibly controversial at the time. It doesn't even show up in the New Testament, and a lot of bishops hated it because Gnostic heretics had actually used it before. But they adopted it for one very specific, highly political reason. It was completely, literally incompatible with Arianism. Adopting this word was a mechanism to explicitly outlaw that division. And let's not forget the political stakes here. When Arius and 2 of his followers refused to sign off on this term, the church excommunicated them, sure, but then Constantine stepped in and dropped the hammer with civil judgment, banishing them into exile. State power was now officially enforcing doctrinal orthodoxy. Look closely at this artifact. We see the Holy Fathers proudly holding the text of the Nicene Creed. But remember, the Creed wasn't just a basic statement of faith. It functioned as a unifying political document, kind of like a loyalty oath. It was designed to mandate a uniform Christian doctrine across the entirety of the inhabited earth, the oikumene, which is exactly where we get the word ecumenical. By signing your name to this document, you are legally aligning yourself with the state-sanctioned view of the divine. Of course, the debate didn't magically end at Nicaea. Let's transition into Section 3, the first three councils compared, and see how these state-sponsored theological debates rapidly escalated over the next few centuries. This table brilliantly illustrates the pattern that started emerging. Walk through this with me. At Nicaea, Constantine dealt with the Trinity. Simple enough, right? But skip forward to 381, at the First Council of Constantinople, and Emperor Theodosius I has to intervene to affirm the Holy Spirit and condemn Apollinarism, a view arguing Christ had no human mind. Then, fast forward another 50 years, and Emperor Theodosius II has to convene the Council of Ephesus to deal with Nestorianism. You can literally see the theological goalposts shifting. Once they settled the relationship between the Father and the Son, the intense debate moved directly to the nature of Christ himself. And every single time, an emperor had to step in as referee to keep the empire from fracturing. To really understand how intense this got, we have to look at the term Theotokos. Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, absolutely hated this term. He preferred Christotokos because he argued that Christ existed in two distinct, separate natures. But the Council of Ephesus, heavily pushed by Cyril of Alexandria, doubled down on Theotokos to insist on the absolute unity of Christ's natures. And guys, this wasn't just an ivory tower academic debate. The real-world political consequence here was the deposition and excommunication of Patriarch Nestorius himself. These words had massive, earth-shaking geopolitical weight. Which brings us nicely to Section 4, Chalcedon and the Great Schism. Because this is the crucial turning point where imperial attempts to force theological synthesis catastrophically backfired. So, in 451 AD, Emperor Marcian calls the Council of Chalcedon. Notice the really subtle contrast here. The council formally adopted the Chalcedonian position, which you see on the left. Christ has two distinct natures, divine and human, united in one person. But a massive portion of the Eastern Empire fundamentally disagreed. They held the Miaphysite position, over on the right, which states that the two natures of Christ are united as one, distinct in thought only. Decades later, Emperor Justinian tried so hard to reconcile this with the Second Council of Constantinople, but it completely failed. The Emperor's Council ended up causing a massive geopolitical schism. Whole regions of the empire permanently alienated themselves from the state church, leading to divisions that, no joke, endure to this very day. Let's shift our focus a bit for Section 5, Shifting Power and Icon Debates. As we approach the final councils, we move away from purely textual arguments and start looking at visual artifacts. This timeline is crucial to anchor us. Look at the sheer scale of history we're talking about here, well over 4.5 centuries, and pay attention to how the imperial role evolved. We kick off with Constantine the Great uniting a freshly legalized Christian empire, then we move through Justinian trying to heal the disastrous Chalcedonian rift, Constantine IV dealing with debates over the wills of Jesus, all the way down to Empress Irene acting as regent in 787 AD. The empire was constantly changing, facing invasions and shifting borders, but the sheer necessity of the emperor acting as the ultimate referee of orthodoxy, that remained absolutely constant. And honestly, by the time we hit the 7th Council, the Second Council of Nicaea in 787 AD, even the visual artifacts themselves were on trial. Referencing the beautiful visual style of the icon here, it's incredibly ironic that the 7th Council had to be called specifically to address iconoclasm, which was the literal destruction of religious images. Empress Irene called this council to officially restore the veneration of icons. It just proves that in this heavily intertwined world of church and state, even a painting had become a vital matter of state security and imperial harmony. All right, let's bring it all home with Section 6, the enduring imperial legacy. How exactly did all these political fractures from late antiquity create the religious landscape we recognize right now? Well, they created it directly. This modern lineage is incredibly revealing. You can actually categorize different modern traditions today by tracing their lineage straight back to specific imperial cutoff points. The Assyrian Church of the East, they only accept the first 2 councils, firmly rejecting Ephesus. The Oriental Orthodox churches are non-Chalcedonians. They accept the first 3, but firmly reject that two-nature definition from Chalcedon. Meanwhile, the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic traditions accept all 7 of these foundational ecumenical councils. It's wild to think about, but the borders of modern belief were literally drawn by the legal decrees of ancient Roman emperors. As we wrap up, I really want you to reflect on this quote. The Constantinian shift represents one of the most profound historical pivots in human history. Before 313 AD, Christianity was an illegal, heavily persecuted sect. After Nicaea, bishops suddenly had imperial authority, state-funded travel budgets, and the very power of the Roman army to enforce their theological conclusions. Now sure, it gave bishops a platform to sometimes speak truth to power. Think of Saint Ambrose, literally threatening emperors with excommunication. But it also tied the kingdom of heaven inextricably to the messy, violent politics of the earth. It permanently altered the trajectory of history. I want to conclude our explainer today by leaving you all with this provocative thought. When the vast apparatus of a mighty empire is used to enforce theological truth, what is gained and what is ultimately lost? As you review your notes for this class, challenge yourselves to ponder this complex legacy. Does establishing an imperial creed protect the faith, or does it permanently reshape it into something else entirely? Thank you all so much for joining me in this lecture, and keep exploring these incredible historical intersections. See you next time.